Question that I want to start with this afternoon and for this message and the next one is, are you happy? Are you happy? Are you happy? Okay, now as you think about that, I'm not expecting anybody to raise their hand. Are you happy sometimes? Or are you happy most of the time? Or are you happy hardly ever? And if you are happy, whichever one of those answers you selected, why? Why are you happy? What makes you happy? Now, in English, when we talk about being happy, usually we're referring to what I would describe as an ephemeral emotion, one that doesn't necessarily last forever or last a long time. We're happy, we have a delicious pie out there that is maybe our favorite, so we get a slice of that, get to eat. Well, that makes us happy. But a few hours from now, we aren't necessarily thinking about that. Maybe something comes up and we're not happy anymore. So we were happy for a while, but then that happiness went away, disappeared. So there is that generally, I would say. Now, you may disagree with me, which is perfectly fine. In fact, I was mentioning to I'm trying to think of my wife and my daughter about this topic, and one of them asked, well, what's the difference between happiness and joy? Happy and joy. And I said, my answer was very simple. I said, look, I'm not talking about joy, so I don't have to worry about what the difference is. But think about it. Sometimes happiness and joy are used interchangeably. But how do you understand the term? Now, we here in the U.S., by the way, this is that time of year when we read in the Bible, U.S. of A. mentioned in the Bible, right? This is an aside, but where is that? Isaiah 9:6, I believe it is. You go to Isaiah 9:6, it will tell you right there, unto USA child is born, unto USA son is given. So that's, if somebody asks you, where is the USA in the Bible, it's right there. Anyway, USA, one of the foundational documents is the Declaration of Independence. I have a transcript here, not ask anybody to quote from it, but this is, as you all know, if you remember your history from high school or college, this is basically an indictment of the British king and of the British people. It's a legal document. Thomas Jefferson is composing it. He's writing a legal document, and he is explaining, which is what you do with an indictment, what the crimes are that the British king has committed and the British people. And he has an introduction to explain the role of government. Why do governments exist? What is the role of a government? And he says, in this explanatory paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident. We don't have to bother proving them. These are absolute truths. Now, I realize that today people question this whole idea of absolute truth. Things are very relativistic. But in the Declaration of Independence, in the 18th century, Thomas Jefferson could say, and I don't believe anybody would have questioned this, he said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. First of all, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That word unalienable, of course, is not a common word. We don't use it in our everyday speech. But as I understand it, it means that these are rights that cannot be taken away. They are basically firmly attached to the fact that we are human beings who are created equal. So these are rights that no one can take away from us. Now, I realize, obviously, somebody could imprison you and takes away one of these rights, but still, as the way we're born and as we are by the design of God, because he talks about the Creator, we're created equal, and these rights are rights that we all have. And he lists some of these rights. He says, among these, and I think that's an important phraseology there, because he's not saying these are the only rights that are unalienable. He's just saying, okay, but here are some, and presumably he's selecting what he views as the most important. He says, among these are life, so nobody can take your life, because that's given by the Creator. Liberty, nobody can take your liberty, because again, that is from the Creator. And this third one, the pursuit of happiness. And I don't remember when it, the first time was that I started maybe looking at the Declaration of Independence more closely to try to figure out the meaning of things. And I don't know what your reaction was, but it always struck me as being a little odd. The pursuit of happiness, that doesn't seem to be, quite the same. Life, liberty, and happiness. What does that mean? Now, Jefferson was inspired by a Scottish political philosopher named John Locke, who wrote, 100 years earlier. And he's writing about politics and political systems. And Locke had talked about the similar idea. He talked about life, liberty, but his third right was not the pursuit of happiness. He talked about property, the right to property. And you and I might think, well, that makes sense. Those are certain unalienable rights. We have the right to life, liberty, and property. Okay, people can't take your property. Obviously, I guess people can in certain circumstances, but normally what is yours is yours. But he changed this to the pursuit of happiness. So, later on, Locke had written not just the two treatises on government, but he wrote another essay called Concerning Human Understanding. And in this essay, Locke wrote, let me rephrase that. He wrote, the necessity of pursuing happiness is the foundation of liberty. As therefore the highest perfection of intellectual nature lies in a careful and constant pursuit of true and solid happiness. Just notice the phrasing, true and solid happiness. Now the happiness that I have, because there's a piece of pecan pie that I love and I enjoy it, would you call that true and solid happiness? No, you'd say, okay, you're happy, I know that, but is that true and solid? Is that like a permanent happiness? No, I called it ephemeral. But he's talking about this true and solid. So the care of ourselves, that we mistake not imaginary for real happiness. So Locke is differentiating. He's saying there's an imaginary, and I would say ephemeral, temporary happiness. And he's saying there's a real happiness, a true and solid happiness, the necessary foundation of our liberty. So this is clearly something Jefferson must have read. Locke continues, the stronger ties we have to an unalterable pursuit of happiness. So that phrase is there in Locke. Pursuit of happiness in general, which is our greatest good, and which, as such, our desires always follow, the more we are free from any necessary determination of our will to any particular action, and from a necessary compliance with our desire set upon any particular and then appearing preferable good, till we have duly examined whether it has a tendency to or be consistent with our real happiness, and therefore till we are as much informed upon this inquiry as to the weight of the matter and the nature of the case demands, we are, by the necessity of preferring and pursuing true happiness as our greatest good, obliged to suspend the satisfaction of our desires in particular cases. And 17th century English is hard to figure out, is it not? You're trying to say, now what exactly is he saying? All right, now I don't claim to completely understand what he's saying either, but what he seems to be saying is that true happiness, genuine happiness, because he uses that expression, pursuing true happiness, is something that we should seek after, because this will create the conditions or promote the conditions of liberty, as opposed to the other kind of happiness that very often we are after, are we not? I mean, a lot of times we do look to things that will make us, quote unquote, happy. Happy, for an afternoon, for a day, for a few days. You look forward to a vacation, right? You've been working hard, you plan a vacation, and sometimes there's a lot of happiness in the planning, the excitement. Oh yeah, I've got this vacation coming up. And so you're happy about that. And then you go on vacation, and provided the flight isn't canceled or you don't have undue delays, you're happy. Then you come back and there's this sort of sometimes a letdown. I know a lot of times that happens at the feast. If you travel, sometimes we used to talk about that, a post-feast letdown. But that happens after any event that we've looked forward to, we've enjoyed, we've been happy, and then afterwards we're not as happy. But Locke seems to be saying, no, we need to be looking for true and solid happiness. Anyway, this particular essay that I'm reading for goes on to explain that Locke and others, these intellectuals, they looked back to Greek philosophers, Greek and Roman, but primarily the Greek philosophers, for some of their ideas. And so without going into all the details, because then I won't have any time for what I want to talk about, is Locke is invoking Greek and Roman ethics. The Greek word for happiness is eudaimonia, which is linked to another Greek word which means virtue or excellence. And so, quoting Aristotle here, the happy man, this is Aristotle, going back to the Greek philosophers, the happy man lives well and does well. That's virtue, the doing of things well. For we have practically defined happiness as a sort of a good life and good action. So happiness wasn't wealth, honor, or pleasure. It was the way you lived your life. You lived a life of virtue. This was the Greek and the Roman idea. And Jefferson admired the Greek philosophers. And so as he's writing this, he's thinking, yes, we need to pursue happiness, the happiness that is derived from living virtuous lives, living upstanding lives. So if you live like, think about it. If you live a life of doing good, for example, somebody asks you for a favor, for help, and you are able to give them that help. How does that make you feel when you're able to help somebody? It makes you feel happy inside, right? It's not the happiness that you felt from eating pie, but it's a genuine satisfaction that I was able to do something that could help someone. And so that is the sense of the happiness here that apparently Jefferson was talking about. So in this, again, just last part of this essay that I'm reading from, essay by a historian, when John Locke and Thomas Jefferson wrote of the pursuit of happiness, they were invoking the Greek and Roman philosophical tradition in which happiness is bound up with the civic virtues. You're being virtuous civically, of courage, of moderation, of justice. So those are the things that you're pursuing. You're pursuing courage, moderation, justice. And as you're pursuing them, now you're pursuing them because do we ever completely get there? No. But we seek after that. For example, all of us, as Christians, we want to live a righteous life. Are we there yet? And I'm not asking for a show of hands. Are we there yet? I dare say most of us would say, well, I'm striving, and many of us fall down many times. I certainly have and do. But that's what we are aiming for. That is what we're striving. So that's what you're pursuing. You haven't reached it, but you are pursuing. So they are civic virtues. So this is, again, according to this particular historian, and I think it's a persuasive argument, this is what Jefferson is talking about when he's talking about the pursuit of happiness. So the idea is that you would live a virtuous life And that would tend to make you happy because you don't have to worry about, hey, I did something bad, or I was cruel, or I was unjust, or I was mean to other people. But you're doing good. You're being an upstanding citizen. Let me give you an example of what can happen when a government doesn't secure that right. The virtue of doing and being good. I've lived and worked for extended periods, several years at a time, in 5 different countries over the years. And if you count Texas as its own country, then make it 6. And in one of those countries, and I won't name it, I don't want to, make anybody feel uncomfortable, but a couple of incidents come to mind. One time, it was an accountant who had a good job working for an important company in the capital city of this country. Now, in this particular place, good jobs were not easy to find. A high unemployment rate, even for professionals, even for an accountant. Sometimes it wasn't easy to find a good job. So he was very happy to have this position. Gave him financial security, the means to provide for his family. Anyway, he came to see me one day, and he told me that as he moved up the ladder in the company, he was now facing a dilemma because the company's executives were requiring him to keep 2 sets of books. We need 2 sets of books. One set with the real figures was for the company's internal use, for company executives. Another set with much lower figures in terms of profit, much lower profits, that was for the tax authorities. So he was in a quandary because here he is, he's trying to live this virtuous life, right? He's pursuing happiness, so to speak. He wants to do the right thing. But the company he works for, this was a well-known company, is asking him to do what? Keep 2 sets of books. Is keeping 2 sets of books, one with real, one with fake figures, is that a virtuous thing? Is that a good thing? I think most of us say no. Well, what would you want to do? Well, you'd want to say, hey, I want to just keep 1 set of books with the real figures. That's it. End of story. I want to be able to pursue happiness without any kind of challenges. That's what Jefferson is saying. Governments are there to make sure that the conditions in the country are such that you don't have to be in this dilemma. Because if he refused, well, what do you think would happen? He gets fired. And they'll find plenty of other accountants who are willing to do that. And in a place where good jobs are hard to find, and you have to provide for your family, what are your choices? This would be a good thing to ask you. Sometimes at the feast, and I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but sometimes at the feast we would talk about, well, the world tomorrow, you're going to do this, you're going to teach people this, and that, and the other. Well, that would be a good question to think about. What advice would you give someone like that? Because it's easy to say, well, hey, Joe, just do the set of books. And then he says, well, what's going to happen to my family? Well, just pray about it. You'll be fine. Well, does God always automatically say, give you a job if you lose your job? I mean, he certainly can. Absolutely. Well, if you don't get a job, it's because you lack faith. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just using that as an example of a country where the government wasn't there, instituted, as Jefferson had said, to secure these rights. He said, governments are instituted to secure these rights so that you are able to pursue happiness. In a country where the government makes sure you are free to pursue happiness, to pursue the virtuous or honest life that can make for a fulfilling life, you don't have to worry that your honesty could cost you your livelihood. In the country that this accountant lived in, the tax authorities knew that many people and companies cheated. It was just a given. We know they cheat, And so they deliberately established very high tax rates, confiscatory rates. So the incentive there is, well, if I tell them the truth, they're going to take all my money. So I'm going to tell them I only made a fraction of what I really made. And then if they take a high rate out of that fraction, well, it's not so bad. You see all this structure that is created. So even if this gentleman found another job, let's say he left that company, what do you think he might encounter in some other company? Probably something very similar. So he'd have to uproot his family and try to move somewhere else, which is not always easy, because if you're going to move to another country, you need to have a visa, you need to have, what if your accounting credentials aren't recognized somewhere else? You move to another country and you say, well, back home I was an accountant. I say, well, your credentials don't work here. You're going to have to start from scratch. Another time, I had a lady who came to me. She was involved in a lawsuit after the premature death of her husband, who had owned a bus company with his siblings. So there's several owners, but he died. And after his death, she inherited his share of the company, and I don't remember all the details now, but she got sued by the siblings. Whenever there's money involved, there's always people wanting that money, correct? So those of us who sometimes lament that we don't have all the money we would wish for, sometimes you should appreciate that, because people aren't going to sue you as easily because you don't have the money. Anyway, she came to me when the case was nearing its conclusion. And she told me some good news. She said her lawyer had been to see the judge in the case, and the judge had told her, I think I'm going to rule in favor of your client. The evidence seems to indicate that she has the stronger argument in the case, so I'm going to rule in her favor. But, you knew there was a but coming, right? Apparently, this judge liked the horses. You think, what's wrong with that? People can like, yeah. Well, he liked to gamble on horses. And gambling on horses, for those of you who don't, can get expensive. And so the judge told her lawyer, he said, you know what? The other side in the lawsuit has offered me this amount of money. Of course, not stated anywhere there was, and that's going to help me keep gambling. And not stated there either was, how much are you willing to offer? Because if I rule in your favor, you haven't offered me anything. So here you are in a situation where the pursuit of happiness would suggest virtue, honesty, uprightness. We should never have to be placed in the position of either having to bribe a corrupt judge or losing the company we depend on for our livelihood. So the pursuit of happiness, as Jefferson brings out, is the antithesis of living under oppression and injustice. Let's go to Genesis here to start out in terms of the Bible here. Genesis 30 and verse 13. Genesis 30:13. Genesis 30:13, we read about the birth of Asher. Okay. So this is Jacob, he has the two wives, Rachel and Leah, and then, basically Leah is the one who's having the children, and then when Rachel doesn't, she gives her husband her handmaid, and then Leah starts saying, well, I'll do the same thing, and so on and so forth. And at one point, then we read about Zilpah, who's Leah's handmaid, having this child, who is Jacob's child. And let me read it here. Verse, am I in the right place here? 13, 13. Let me go there. Zilpah bore Jacob another son, and Leah said, "Happiness has come, for women will call me happy." So she named him Asher. And that word Asher in Hebrew is the word for happy. Happy. So if you are happy in Hebrew, you are Asher. Asher just means happy. And in fact, in Jewish tradition, Asher and his descendants lived up to the meaning of his name. And here let me quote to you from one of these Jewish sources. Asher's descendants, in more than one regard, deserved their name. Asher, meaning happy or happiness. The tribe of Asher was the one most blessed with male children, and its women were so beautiful that priests and princes sought them in marriage. The abundance of oil in the land possessed by Asher so enriched the tribe that none of them needed to hire a habitation. The soil was so fertile that in times of scarcity, and especially in the sabbatical year, Asher provided all Israel with olive oil. And the Asherites were also renowned for wisdom. So truly a very happy tribe. But as I describe the happiness, what other term would you use to describe the tribe of Asher? When you see that they have the most male children, the women are beautiful, they have so much oil, the soil is so fertile, they have all this wisdom. What other term would you think to use? Well, I would think to use the term blessed. They would be very blessed to have all these things. And in fact, this word Asher, which means happy or very happy, is also translated in the Old Testament as blessed. So in the Old Testament, this concept of happiness, we've been talking about the Greek concept of happiness that inspired Jefferson. But for us as Christians, when we look at the Bible and we look at the Old Testament, this word Asher, meaning happy, is also the word that means blessed. Blessed. So for the Old Testament, if you are happy, you are blessed. And likewise, if you are blessed, you are happy. That's the equation that is made. And particularly, this we see in the wisdom literature, in the book of Psalms, in the book, mostly in the book of Psalms, some in the book of Proverbs, and some, I think, in Ecclesiastes. But in the book of Psalms, this word Asher occurs or is translated as blessed 27 times in the Old Testament. It's translated as happy 18 times. So you see it as a synonym. And in the book of Psalms, it appears 19 times. So let's look at some of these quickly. So we'll be in the book of Psalms. So let's start off with the very first verse in the very first psalm. Psalm 1, verse 1. Now, I don't know which version you have, which translation into English you have. I'm reading from the Revised English Bible. But I think a lot of your translations would say blessed is the one, right? How many of you have the word blessed in your translation of Psalms 1:1? Okay. This translation has happy. It says, happy is the one who does not take the counsel of the wicked for a guide, or follow the path that sinners tread, or take his seat in the company of scoffers. So what is, here, this is something that you would have to pursue, isn't it? Because it means you are living a virtuous life. You don't listen to the wicked. You don't take their advice. You don't follow the path of sinners. You don't sit and keep company with scoffers. So you are working to avoid those behaviors that will lead you astray. And so as a result of that, you are, this translation says, happy. You are happy. Now I realize, people may be listening who are not in the U.S., who are not Americans, We might say, well, pursuit of happiness, that's an American ideal. Yeah, well, I understand it's in the Declaration of Independence. But I think the pursuit of happiness, as I'm describing it, is universal. I think this is something we all should aspire to. We should all aspire to be happy like this guy in Psalms 1:1. Let's go to Psalm 2. And I'm just highlighting where this word, Asher, occurs. Psalm 2 and verse 12. I think it is. Let me see if I see that. Yes, Psalm 2, verse 12. This particular translation is combined 11 and 12, so I'll read the whole section. It says, "Worship the Lord with reverence, tremble and play glad homage to the King. For fear the Lord may become angry and you may be struck down in mid-course, for his anger flares up in a moment. But happy are all who find refuge in him." So you go to God like James says, you draw nigh to God. He draws nigh to you. That's what happiness is. Way back whenever there was a song about happiness is, and it would list a bunch of things that happiness is, but they were all these ephemeral, fleeting things. But this is true happiness. You know what John Locke said? True and solid happiness. That's what it is, finding refuge in God. Let's jump ahead to Psalm 32. Psalm 32. And verses 1 and 2 here. Psalm 32, verses 1 and 2. "Happy is he whose offense is forgiven, whose sin is blotted out. Happy is he to whom the Lord imputes no fault, in whose spirit there is no deceit." So if your version says blessed, that's the same word. It means it's Asher. It means happy. You're happy. You're forgiven, and there is no guile in you. You've become someone who is seeking to be true and honest and an upstanding individual. Psalm 33, verse 12. 33, verse 12. "Happy is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he has chosen for his own." That was 32, verse 12. Let's go some more. Psalm 34, verse 8. 34, verse 8. "Taste and see that the Lord is good. Happy are they who find refuge in him." Happy are they. Now, there's several other occurrences. I'm not going to list them all. Let's jump ahead to Psalm 84. A couple more here in the book of Psalms. Psalm 84. And we read here in verse 5, "Happy are those who dwell in your house. They never cease to praise you." So if you are in God's presence, if you are seeking to remain in his presence, that is what happiness is. And who remains in God's presence? Well, those who seek to obey him, love him, serve him. That's what happiness is. If you're pursuing happiness, that's what we are pursuing. Happy those whose refuge is in you, whose hearts are set on the pilgrim ways, the ways that allow you to serve God and to serve him better. And then one more in Psalm 128, a couple of verses there. Psalm 128, verses 1 and 2. "Happy are all who fear the Lord, who conform to his ways. You will enjoy the fruit of your labors. You will be happy and prosperous." So you fear the Lord, you follow his ways, you are happy, and you are blessed, and you are prosperous. So as we have seen now after the break, we'll start looking at some of the scriptures in the New Testament. But we see that in the Old Testament, and here we've looked at several scriptures in the book of Psalms, every time we see this word Asher, that's why I introduced the tribe of Asher there, because that's the meaning of the name. Every time we see that this true, solid happiness is serving God, loving God, obeying God. That's what makes us truly happy and truly blessed. So if you would bow your heads, we'll conclude the service of the study. Father, we thank you once again that we have the privilege of having access to your word, to the Bible. For many centuries throughout history, people didn't have that privilege, didn't have that opportunity, and we do, and sometimes it's easy to forget what a blessing, what a privilege that is. So Father, we want to thank you for your word. Help us to be truly appreciative, and help us to seek the true happiness that comes from serving you, from loving you, from doing what is right in your sight, which in turn will give us that sense of fulfillment and satisfaction that makes us truly and profoundly happy. So again, we thank you for your blessing, the blessing of being able to be here this afternoon, and we give you thanks for all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.